Welcome to a USC Libraries tutorial for finding and choosing a clinical practice guideline. Clinical practice guidelines are a publication type intended to help a professional make a decision in healthcare. They may have slightly different names like standards of care or practice recommendations, but always include statements or questions about pertinent and important issues in healthcare. The authors find individual research studies, grade the quality of the evidence provided by each study, and combine evidence into recommendations that respond to each statement or question. Guidelines are typically updated every few years as new questions arise and new evidence becomes available. Because creating guidelines requires gathering a large number of qualified clinicians in a subject area, government agencies, professional societies, and nonprofit agencies are the organizations that publish the majority of guidelines. Guidelines can be published as a journal article or can be published as a report. There is no database that includes all guidelines. There is also no source that instructs clinicians on which to use, as selecting a guideline to follow is a decision the clinician makes themselves. Assessing a guideline for quality is time-consuming. Most professionals prefer to do this work once. They assess whether an organization generally creates high-quality guidelines following all standards, then assume that this organization will continue to perform at this level for all future guidelines. Faculty try to give you the benefit of their assessments during clinical education. Throughout your didactic classes, you read guidelines or care plans based on guidelines. During your experiential education, you're supervising clinicians referred to or cited guidelines. This teaches students which organizations are trusted to create evidence-based guidelines for this practice area or subject, so they can return to these organizations for updated guidance while working as a professional. If you're in school or recently graduated, review your class materials to find citations to or mentions of guidelines from a specific organization. Then, use a web search to find the organization's website and review it to determine if the guideline previously referred to is still the most recent or if there has been an update. If you're looking for a guideline on a disease or condition you did not study directly, consider looking for agencies, groups, or societies that might provide information on this practice area. Many healthcare professionals take a course about some aspect of infectious disease, and likely saw at least one guideline produced by the Infectious Diseases Society of America. Perhaps ISDA would be a good choice for browsing for guidelines about diagnosis, treatment, or prognosis of infectious diseases. Some organizations understand that producing quality guidelines is a time-consuming task. Instead of creating every guideline themselves, many organizations will endorse guidelines from other organizations that they believe are relevant and high quality. If you're not able to find relevant organizations, the USC Libraries create research guides for different kinds of clinicians and students that include links to and names of organizations more often trusted by that profession. You can go to these groups' websites and look for guidelines. Browsing a website of guidelines created by a trusted organization can be the quickest way to find high-quality, relevant guidelines that are more likely to be accepted by clinicians in your field and that are applicable to your practice area. In reviewing the guidelines from these sources, you'd likely notice that the titles are very general, despite the content of the guideline being incredibly detailed and precise, and being able to be used to answer very specific questions about care. This guideline, titled Diabetes Technology, actually provides a lot of recommendations about individual technologies like pens, monitors, and insulin delivery devices, along with advice about planning meals, how frequently to review and examine data from technologies, and teaching caregivers about how to use technologies. In order to answer a specific question like, should I provide a continuous glucose monitor to my pediatric patient with newly diagnosed type 2 diabetes, you may need to open and review several guidelines with general titles indicating potential relevance to new technologies in diabetes. If these processes fail, you can try a few methods of searching. This is typically the lowest value and most difficult way to proceed, as you need to carefully assess every found item for relevance, quality, and value. Some guidelines are published as journal articles and appear in citation databases. Start at the USC Libraries database page and browse or search for PubMed, Embase, or CINAHL. In PubMed, conduct your search, then add and select the guideline limit from the article type limit. In Embase, conduct your search, then use the study type limit to find practice guidelines. In CINAHL, use Advanced Search and select the practice guidelines publication type before searching. In all citation databases, search the database only for the disease or condition of interest. Here is a representation of that same diabetes technology guideline in PubMed. The words appearing in the abstract and title are the only words that are searched by this database. We know this guideline includes detailed information about using glucose monitors, but I would never find it in PubMed if I searched for glucose monitors. Guidelines typically do not use specific words like names of drugs, names of therapies, names of tests, or names of technologies in their titles or abstracts. Search using a disease or condition and make some educated guesses about the likely content based on the abstract, title, author group, and other clues in the record in the database. Citation databases will include guidelines published as peer-reviewed articles. Another option is to use a free guideline database. There are 3 advantages of using these tools. First, all results are guidelines. Second, many guideline databases include reports, which cannot be found in citation databases. Third, many guideline databases include additional information about the guideline in a searchable format. You may be able to search some of these databases for names of individual drugs, therapies, tests, or technologies, and find guidelines that discuss these more easily than in a citation database. Free guideline databases emerge frequently, and the libraries do not endorse any specific one. Let's take a look at one, Guideline Central, to see if it has the advantages just described. I did a search for diabetes and retrieved many results. From looking at the titles and clicking through these, I can already see that every single result is a guideline. I can use the limits provided by this database to see there are guidelines from government organizations, which are typically only published as free reports. I can also search this database for continuous glucose monitor and find citations to several guidelines that seem to mention this technology. A third option for finding guidelines is to use the clinical decision support tool named UpToDate. It includes short summaries of conditions and diseases and is licensed by USC Libraries for our users. Access UpToDate from the library's databases page, then search UpToDate for a disease name. You will find summaries about how to diagnose, manage, treat, or prevent a disease. These disease-focused summaries typically include citations to guidelines. If you're searching for a common condition, you may find a single summary consisting of all the guidelines cited in all the summaries in UpToDate about this disease. Finding guidelines is typically only half the work. The libraries cannot tell you which guideline to choose. To help yourself select a guideline from the list generated by these sources, consider the scope and setting. A guideline made by nutritionists may not provide insight to the scope of care for a physician. A guideline made by a society in the United Kingdom may not provide relevant advice about drug selection for a person practicing in the United States. Guidelines may cover specific populations in more depth, so consider whether the patient for whom you are planning care is older, younger, has a coexisting condition, is hospitalized or community dwelling, or has other differences that could impact their care. After selecting a guideline that appears relevant to your question and patient, review some quality markers. Guidelines are intended to be created by a group of experts in a field, who have searched exhaustively for relevant evidence, who have ranked and graded the quality of the evidence. Guidelines should include information to allow you to understand how the authors were chosen, how searches were conducted, and how evidence was ranked and graded. How well these processes are performed, or if they are skipped, can influence how much you choose to trust a guideline, or might influence you to choose another guideline instead. Contact the USC Libraries with more questions on how to find guidelines.